Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Day 3, track number 7, where we discuss global challenges. My name is Jonne Heikkinen, and I'm the leader and moderator of this track. I'm super excited that today is the last day, end of day, but we still have quite a lot of people joining us online. So we already started seeing questions, which is really exciting. So please continue posting your questions on the panel. So the topic we're going to be discussing is about artificial intelligence, which is a big topic. There are many sessions have been already on this topic, starting from the development and the career paths and social aspects. So now we're going to talk more about augmented decision making. So I have Jonne and I have Joy, who is going to join us. So welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Hello all, my name is Jonne Heikkinen. I'm the Managing Director for Thoughtworks Finland and Nordics. So pleasure to meet you all and happy to have you here. I represent Thoughtworks. Thoughtworks is a company almost soon 30 years, agile pioneer in the agile software development industry. However, we work in the design, tech, strategy, and in the intersection of that. And AI obviously is a very kind of natural part of all that and everything that we do. So, hello from the sunny city of Helsinki. I burned my face a bit earlier today. Hopefully, it's not glowing too hard for the audience's screens. So let's take it from here. Sharing my screen. I assume everything is going to be visible perfectly fine now. So AI-augmented decision making. Let's start first with a question. So an average Fortune Global 500 company, what is the number of decisions on a daily basis? Take 15 seconds to think about kind of what sort of scale could it be. Are we talking about tens of thousands? Are we talking about hundreds, millions? What's the kind of scale that we're discussing? So take 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds to think about that. It's actually 400 million decisions. 400 million decisions is quite a bit if you consider the decisions that you do in both digital and in real world environments. And that's quite a few decisions if you think about kind of overall, where can you, what can you make, what of those decisions could you make even better with the use of AI? And why we're talking about decisions is actually that AI is very much intertwined and kind of connected to decision making. The definition for us in Thoughtworks is that AI is not just about exploiting past data, which basically quite a lot of folks think that it is really about. But it's actually interacting with the world through the decisions that we make, where we can use AI in order to make those decisions better, to learn something new. So it's actually interacting with the world and learning from the causal effects that we have and taking those into consideration in the next decision and the next actions that we make. If you think about the decisions, we can basically frame them in different categories. So here's, as you see on the bottom, we have a line in which on the left side, we have more of the type of decisions that are more of tactical and operational decisions. Quite often these decisions have fast feedback loops. So we have feedback loops where we are able to do a high volume of decisions, for example, in digital environments, and learn from those in relatively fast fashion in order to basically learn what's the kind of how the market or consumer trends are behaving or changing. On the right side of the screen, we have strategic and creative decisions, where usually these are slower and more complex, and these are more kind of simulated feedback loops. So basically, this sort of these sort of decisions are more of the type of what are the kind of plans given the strategic scenarios that we should be executing. What should the let's say portfolio of R&D organization, what are the projects, R&D project portfolio of an organization be like, let's say for the next, for Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. And in the between, we have things that are more of kind of nuanced. So augmenting operations, like how can we augment kind of large scale systems such as airports in order to make them more optimal based on the hundreds of constraints and preferences that we might have. And it has both kind of the strategic element of decisions, but it also has these sort of fast feedback loop based decisions. And in creativity, it's something in between as well. So how can we, for example, leverage AI to augment decision making of a designer or a product developer? So this is a framework that you can basically think about the different decisions that those organizations, and most likely your organizations as well, are doing, and kind of what is the relationship between AI. And why we are kind of in the next 1 hour, the key takeaway from kind of one of the key takeaways will be kind of this sort of framing to think about the AI opportunities through either about automating decisions or augmenting decisions or somewhere in between. But those require quite a different sort of approach in order to be successful. And the opportunities also have very sort of different time span that they touch upon. AI is also not just about making current decisions better, but it also introduces a next set of capabilities. And when I talk about capabilities, this is a bit of a heavy slide, but I will try to squeeze the essence of it while I talk. So on the left, we have industry forces. These are more or less present and more or less influencing each one of our organizations, we like it or not. We can influence and we can capitalize these industry forces through the different organizational and business development areas, different functions that we have in the organization, anywhere from design to supply chains to day-to-day management. And if we kind of then have the AI goggles on and kind of think about what are the capabilities that we can influence through these functions, tackle these industry forces, either ride the wave or be able to kind of react accordingly or defend the position. These are the kind of capabilities that we see are the most influential at the moment. So we see that the rise of machine amplified creativity will permanently change design processes, and it's already here. we see that there's the self-learning systems of today already can deliver these sort of experiences that are adapting to the changing world constantly, instead of trying to predict just the past historical data, which is not always predicting the future, obviously, if the world is changing, we need constantly faster and faster. Simulations about portfolio management, large-scale optimizations, and we will be seeing even kind of we will be anywhere even to kind of think about whole business units that are where large majority of the end-to-end operations are being AI augmented or AI automated. And in order to get more kind of beef around the bones, in order to get more kind of, let's say, so what is Jonne meaning when he's talking about the next set of capabilities? Let's walk through 3 different examples that basically puts these frames into use, makes you think about how the decisions are really, how AI is augmenting or automating those decisions, and how kind of everything comes together. So let's soon go there, but before we actually jump into that, one more dimension to add. So we had these 2-dimensional line here, where we have the tactical and operational problems, and on the right side we have strategic and creative problems. One more angle to think about is also kind of the high uncertainty and low uncertainty, which is highly correlated also with the data volume. So if you kind of think about quite a lot of organizations today are actually changing opportunities of high data volume, either kind of directly aiming what is the kind of data that we have, or gathering the data, building the warehouses, building the data lakes in order to be able to do something with their data. But there's actually another dimension as well, where you can operate with AI with low data volume, where actually the historical data might not be at all useful in predicting the future, but for various reasons, one being the world beneath changes so fast that basically any historical data could be useless, well, not useless, but not as useful as the current data that we learn from our interactions with the world. So let's dive into a couple of examples. We will be talking about dynamic pricing. We will be talking about AI-augmented product development. And we will be also talking about scenarios and futures planning. So a couple of different examples that basically fall under this sort of a frame where you can think about how AI can optimize or enhance your decision making. So let's start with the dynamic pricing one. So dynamic pricing in an e-commerce environment, as you can imagine, that's a lot of decisions, a lot of automated decisions in a fast-paced environment. So this is a real-world case example. We work with Forenom, a Nordic B2B hospitality business. But basically, what it does is rents apartments mainly for B2Bs. We started working with them with the kind of approach of how can we basically learn from our actions and price points that we set directly in order to kind of be able to leverage that information that we previously used in the next pricing recommendations that we use, instead of trying to predict seasonal trends only or trying to predict from past historical data alone. How can we do that? And will that be effective? We managed to create 13% increase in revenue per available room. And both at the same time, we improved the customer satisfaction and the room utilization rate, which basically means that we were doing a capacity optimization through the manipulation of price. So basically here, the pricing expert's role was to set constraints. The algorithm is able to work out with pricing recommendations in a certain boundary. And within that, it has the freedom to recommend any price based on the real-time feedback it learns from the e-commerce environment. This is basically the interaction of where AI is augmenting the decision-making of pricing experts in a really fast-paced environment. So the pricing experts gives the kind of playground, guardrails, targets. These are the kind of limits that you are able to play in. And the role of AI here, which is basically a concept called reinforcement learning, basically only does kind of recommendation of prices, and it learns from each one of the feedbacks. The feedback here basically can be just customer either buys the product or does not buy the product, does rent the apartment or doesn't rent the apartment. We have a bunch of other information available from the current state, from the current time point that we are in. That we can connect to the decision that we made about the pricing point, learn from the feedback, and if it was a positive, we can force the algorithm by providing a reward. And if it doesn't work out too well, we can penalty the algorithm. And basically, really simple framework for kind of finding double-digit margin improvements in pricing. Relatively simple concept. And this is just one example of kind of an opportunity in a fast-paced digital environment where you can use AI augmentation to basically have tangible business benefits. This is one example. Second example, from this one, we're going on the upper right corner. So scenario/futures planning. So obviously, very few key decisions that are being made during strategy upgrade rounds or on a quarterly basis or a kind of limited time window nevertheless. So what's the kind of, if you break this down into kind of approach and what does it really mean? How can AI help in strategic scenario planning? So this is a real world example of a client of ours that basically came to us with the kind of question of they would like to reach 0 CO2 emission levels in 5 to 10 years time where they currently are at. So, and then basically it boils down to sub questions. First of all, how should they understand, how should they kind of visualize or map or their current carbon footprint in a format that is actionable? The second one, what is the CO2 emission of a given business plan and scenario? If they have a strategic plan, given the business scenario, what's the CO2 emission in that? And what are the viable plans in those different scenarios to reach the targeted CO2 emission levels? So relatively abstract construct, but I'll break it down into 3 different steps that basically give you a better understanding of how can you think about decision augmentation in complex case as in strategic scenario planning. So first, there's 3 phases. There's carbon footprint modeling. 2, you have to have the scenarios. And 3rd, scenario simulation and optimization. So first of all, in an environment, this is if you think about the high data volume, low data volume, this is definitely on the low data volume part where we had a cold start problem. First of all, we need to model the parts. What are the different parts of the business that we need to model that are causing those CO2 emissions? How those parts are connected to one another, and how those connections, what are the effects and costs in terms of the CO2 emissions between those parts of the business. And fourth one, basically connect everything together and model the whole system, how the business works with relationship to CO2 emissions. Basically, this was done in a mutual collaboration with the client, in joint collaboration with the client, mapping out the business, workshops, interviews, drawing the business open, and kind of agreeing on certain milestones that, yes, it reflects, it's the best approximate that we can make of our business. By no means 100% accurate, but it doesn't have to be in order for it to be useful. Second, scenarios. Obviously, we need to outline the scenarios so that they can take probability into account. So you most likely know your kind of the drivers and the environments and the driving forces in your business. And you can map out what are the different scenarios of those. But we need to be able to kind of map out some sort of a probability or likelihood for those to happen. What are the, let's say, all EV logistics scenario? Where does it happen? What is the kind of likelihood of that? And what are the kind of forces that it is connected to? So when we map the scenarios of our future into something that we can basically pass for algorithms in terms of probabilities, we now have the system, the business mapped out, and we have the kind of forecasts or the future scenarios and probabilities that are going to influence on those. So when we have these two, we can move forward to third one, which is basically the simulation and optimization of it. And when I talk about scenario simulation and optimization, I basically mean two things. First of all, given scenario and a business plan, we can easily map what is the estimated CO2 emissions with the chosen configuration. For example, what is the kind of how the logistics has been implemented? What sort of materials are we using in our product development, and so on? And this information, with this example client that we're using for the CO2 emission, we created a user interface for the board and for the senior management can basically have a dialogue, conversation about how the different plans are going to influence their CO2 emission levels that they have. You can also turn it the other way around, where it becomes an optimization challenge. So if you provide a target CO2 emission levels, you provide the constraints, let's say, gross margin has to be on a certain level. We need to have certain headcount. We are not going to do cuts in the number of employees, for example. We can start to optimize, given these constraints, given these target CO2 emissions, what are the ways for that business, for that model, that the system that we modeled, given the forecasts of the trends and the probabilities, what are the kind of possible routes that we have in order to reach that targeted CO2 level? And that is a really powerful tool. And basically, you can replace CO2 with anything that, even no matter how difficult it is to measure, you can end up having a capability where you over time are kind of building a new capability to augment decisions in strategic scenario planning, where you can make better decisions than that before. It's a capability that you have to invest in, and over time it's get better and better. and you have a more broader understanding of the different implications of your business with this sort of an approach. This was the second example. So first we discussed about something on a fast-paced environment. This is where we have few key decisions being made, very different type of approach where AI can be leveraged. And then the third one is R&D, product development, more specifically. There's plenty of decisions. There's something in between. So plenty of decisions, but always human in the loop. So basically has something of those two different worlds, the dynamic pricing world where you have fast-paced, but also kind of you need to have the human in the loop always, as in the strategic scenario planning. So one example, I'll quickly walk through this from cautious about time. So we started off the R&D product development journey by working together with Mackmyra, a whiskey distillery in Sweden, where we basically, they wanted to make something extra special for their 20th birthday, their master blender to be more precise. And she wanted to leverage sales data, historical data, her sale taste notes, open source information about whiskey reviews and rankings to come up with a system that basically provides recipe recommendations to her, and she can rank out those, select which ones are the most interesting ones, pass them back on the system. The system would learn and basically provide better recipes over the time. What we ended up with a whiskey recipe that ended up being on shelves where that actually was also a good tasting whiskey. So it happened to won a best international malt whiskey in blind tasting test by American Distillery Institution. So it also proves that AI can come up with recipes that are good and tasty, as we can also see from the whiskey-based reviews where it's outperforming the Mackmyra average. So this is where we basically stumbled the first time and doubled the first time on kind of AI-augmented creativity. And from there, we were fortunate to get to work together with Mondelez. In the beginning, we started looking at how can we use AI to make product development faster and with improved quality with the use of AI. Those were the kind of key things that we started looking together. I won't go through all the kind of targeted benefits from the get-go. This was something that we started collaboration in 2019. We have Joe mentioned for us on a roundtable-ish type of conversation in a bit that we will be discussing the benefits in more depth. So we will be coming back to these ones in a second. But before we go there, but I would like you to kind of, so the example flow that I mentioned with Mackmyra, I'll open it up a bit more so that you have a better understanding of how everything basically works together. So this is an example workflow. Product developer sets a target, preferences, and constraints for a target product. The model creates a lot of recipes and predicts the success for each one of those. And the model then identifies which ones also fit within the kind of constraints and preferences that the master blender or the product developer has set. Obviously, you always have to manually validate the samples, because if you see a recipe with the ranking, that doesn't help too much. When you have something physical, you want to create it, so you need to have a human in the loop. And then obviously you need to be able to evaluate and provide the sample back to the model. And the model would learn from the decisions, model would learn from the feedback of the users and take that into consideration in the next step of decisions of recommending recipes for product developers. So this is the example workflow. And we actually have started, we have been working with Mondelez now in this sort of fashion for quite some time already. And actually, I don't do the best honors of kind of discussing this from the product developer's lens. So why don't we actually take Madeline, who's a product developer from Mondelez, to actually tell from her perspective what's the benefit and what's the use of having AI augmented system in product development, augmenting the decisions that she's making on a daily basis.
Thank you. My name is Madeline Starr, and I'm a senior product developer for Mondelez, and I have about 18 years of product development experience. I've been working with the AI tool for about 6 months. I've gotten some great experience with it. In the course of normal product development, I would only be able to handle so many variables at one time, even using extra tools like design of experiment. What the AI tool offers me is the ability to really manage a lot of different variables that would otherwise be inaccessible to me. I'm able to explore a lot of spaces that I might not have thought of on my own. And the model also is able to keep track of constraints that would be difficult for me to keep track of, things like cost, nutritional information, processing information, or even safe usage levels. The model can track all of that and make sure that I'm not going out of those bounds, so I don't create a great product, try to launch it, and then realize, oops, the sodium is too high. So as an example, if I were going to make the perfect gingerbread cookie, and I really wanted to find something that was just the perfect blend, there's a lot of pieces that go into a gingerbread cookie. There's all the different spice blends, and there's also the levels of the brown sugar and the molasses that can really affect what the cookie tastes like at the end of the day. So what I've done here is I've created 4 different gingerbread cookie recipes, and I've had them assessed by consumers. So I'm able to put that information in as well as the consumer information. And then with just the click of a button, it will generate recipes for me that are exploring different spaces that I probably wouldn't have identified on my own. So it's definitely looking at the ratios of the sweeteners, the brown sugar, the dark molasses, and playing with those, seeing where the model thinks that plays best. But additionally, it's doing things I never would have thought to think of, like, okay, I'm just going to completely remove the cloves from this one. I would have thought of cloves as something that was necessary to this recipe, but the model says there might be some space where if you've got this ratio of the brown sugar and the rest of the spices, the cloves might actually cause some detriment to the consumer liking score. So I'm able to then generate these recipes, make the samples, and assess them with my team, and then come back and feed that information here and generate more recipes and really hone in very quickly on what great looks like. So back to you guys.
Perfect. So that was Madeline walking her through kind of her perspective of how AI can augment product development works, and actually already augments through the work that we have done together. But actually, I think what's basically we have here Joe Mantern, Senior Director for Digital R&D, to walk us through kind of his perspective from more of the kind of business stakeholder perspective. Why did Mondelez embark the journey overall? But before we dive deeper, Joe Mantern, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I am Joe Mantern, Senior Director for Digital R&D at Mondelez International. And I joined Mondelez a little over 3.5 years ago, following a 20-year career with P&G, most of which was in a digital or data space. And to now lead the part of our digital journey that includes bringing artificial intelligence to the way we do our technical work. I think maybe it's worth mentioning for those that are not totally familiar with Mondelez. I think the past couple of bits have probably given us some indication, because most are very familiar with our brands, right? So what's one of the largest snacking companies in the world, some very well-known brands, including Oreo, Chips Ahoy, Cadbury Chocolate, Trident Gum, Sour Patch Kids, and so on. So I'm extremely popular with my kids, which is great. Relevant to this conversation we're about to have, we have over 2,500 scientists in R&D distributed across 12 global tech centers. So that's
quite a few. That's quite a few. And actually, from the brands, Marabou is my favorite. Maybe people in the WUWA can have write down their favorite ones. Well, hey, first of all, if you think about the AI augmented decision making, so here basically it's some, as mentioned, somewhere in between the kind of very few strategic key decisions made on an annual basis and something in between digital environments. It's somewhere in the middle, but kind of, so this is what we'll be discussing about. But what made you and Mondelez to kind of start looking at AI augmented product development? What were the kind of initial reasons that got you interested in looking at those?
Yeah, sure. I think we recognized and we believe that this technology space is something we need to learn how to master. Not if we should, but more as a business imperative. Our right to compete as a technical organization and more broadly as a company. I mean, we also strongly believe, as I'm sure many do, in attracting and developing the best technical talent in our industry. And folks coming out of college or leading research phases these days are perhaps not expecting, but they're certainly looking for the opportunity to leverage capability like this and develop their own skills as world-class scientists. So as we started to assess what might be possible, we were inspired by the success you were having with the whiskey you just talked about. So we struck up a conversation to explore what that might look like for us. And at that time, what we found particularly intriguing was the concept that the potential to leverage AI to augment the technical expert, enabling them to make better decisions faster versus replacing them, which is a common perception of things like AI, right? That was, for us, was, as I said, we found it intriguing.
And what I really like is what you mentioned about all the kind of also the talent aspect. So kind of that is also about leveraging the new capabilities that talent coming out from the university these days have, and also being able to attract those. Yeah. That's a really interesting point. So basically, maybe something that would be interesting to learn more about is if it change tax a bit and go into human creativity, and what is the kind of role of AI really in the augmentation of the creativity? So kind of what parts of that do you see being the most influential ones?
Yeah, so I suppose I'd start with the fact that we are certainly leveraging artificial intelligence in two main areas. One is in the automation of, let's say, low value add repetitive work. For us, we can see that as drains on that creative energy. So we can leverage it to free up our scientists. The other is augmented decision making, the delivery of far superior outcomes. So if you then start with the fact that we are a company that makes snacks to delight our consumers. And our ambition is to deliver the right snack at the right time and make sure we make it in the right way. So the products we develop and deliver need to meet a pretty high bar. So as you described earlier, right, with that linear process, I assume that is relatively similar across industries. I mean, it has been in my experience to date. That's driven by the investment, mainly in the final stage, right? When we put things with the consumer, and every prior stage to that is an attempt, is put in place to give us the greatest success with the consumer when we invest all that time and energy in that final step. But by its very design, this linear process of increased investment in time and resource is quite constraining, right? And so it's in this environment that we see really human creativity constrained to at best incremental changes versus the potential for true breakthrough.
That's a good kind of distinction, also kind of from not only being the incremental one, but also kind of being able to spot new opportunities, new areas, and focus the product developers' attention to areas that otherwise he or she wouldn't have thought about. If we kind of dive a bit deeper actually into the constraints of or actually the kind of the change that is coming from the product developers, this sort of new capability is causing for product developer. Would be curious to hear kind of from your perspective, what's the change? So if there's a kind of system that is helping product developers to make better decisions in product development, in the R&D process, so where the kind of new time is then being allocated into, and what's the change in the role?
So the role of the product developer, and how it's impacted by this?
Yeah, that would be interesting to kind of hear your perspective on that.
Sure. Well, their role, we've just seen Madeline talk about her hands-on experience and the way she interacts with the capability. And what you see is that the role of the developer becomes one of training the model, right? Initially setting the target, then assessing, if you remember, Shaw said, I loaded up some recipes and I pressed the button and it came back with suggestions. Well, as those proposed outputs come and the model iterates, the developer needs to leverage their expertise and educate the model. So it's a true partnership, which goes back to the thing that intrigued us to start with. It's not a replacement. In fact, I heard Madeline say it there. When you see this partnership happen and you have a seasoned expert come to you, show you the new formula and excitedly point at a couple of the lines describing, the addition of new ingredients or flavors or a combination of those and saying, I never would have thought of that. Then something special is happening, right? And I'd say we just heard Madeline say it, but that's a measure of success for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. What does success look like? But I think that's from the product developer's perspective, what the kind of success would look like. But if you think about the broader benefits and think about kind of scaling this sort of capability within the organization, what would be the kind of, let's say, top handful kind of benefits that you feel are the most relevant ones?
Sure. Let's go with 5. So I'd say the first one is building and capturing knowledge and putting that knowledge back in every developer's hands. So effectively making every developer as good as our best. Second is in that linear process, reducing the weight of each development phase. Consequently, you reduce that pain or discomfort in potentially iterating back. And the third one, I suppose, is just to build on that. Once you're able to do that, you can actually speed those up or condense them. So potentially reducing the time to market. There are many other factors that determine the time to get to market, but from the contribution of this process, you can shrink that right down. The fourth is something we've definitely touched on, which is breaking the existing constraints built into this process and emphasizing the focus on consumer delight and versus timeline and budget being the primary constraints, allowing a true focus on what's going to delight the consumer. And this, it moves you toward breakthrough innovation versus that incremental tick. Then the fifth, I'm going to have to describe as potential benefit, because we're still to unlock it, but it has become clearly apparent as an opportunity. And that is the ability, the potential to completely redesign that process. That linear process as described at the beginning is there because of the way things are done and the way decisions are made, the way investments are made and the costs. We can break that down from a linear one to something that is far more simultaneous in nature, so far iterative, and put the consumer right at the center. And so for me, that means consumer at the beginning to help set that target throughout the process as well as at the end. So I think for me, those are the 5 broadest benefits I can summarize here.
That's well put. And something that I would like to kind of revisit was the first one actually that you mentioned, which was about building a capability and putting in the hands of all product developers to make them as good as our best. So kind of would it be kind of in my head, it feels like as if as an investment to educate someone that doesn't have the input-output limiters that we as humans have, and that system is able to kind of educate and train and work with unlimited number of product developers to make them better. So shouldn't this change the kind of whole mindset of thinking about this as kind of an investment to educate the system that you can basically pass the whole collective knowledge of the organization to the individuals? I'm not sure if you can catch my kind of mental the thought of train here, but
I mean, it certainly provokes a couple of thoughts for me. Let me say 2 things about that. One, how I found myself talking about this is just reference to a well-known kind of phrase about we stand on the shoulders of giants. Right now, the beauty of this capability is, I think traditionally we would think about capturing knowledge in a document form, in a knowledge-based form. This capability absorbs it and grows, and it's a best way to put it in people's hands so they can use it. Never mind reading through, referencing, and drawing upon. It's there, it's active, it's captured. And that interaction, that expert, that developer will build on top of that, and it will continue to evolve. And so the other thought that your question or comment prompted for me is how we probably therefore want to think about all of this, because we hire individuals for their potential as much as what they can do the day they walk through the door. And we invest in their development over time and grow their expertise and reap the benefits of that investment. Quite often with tools, digital tools, models, AI, the magic AI button people are seeking, we expect kind of this immediate results, right? Okay, we'll pay for it. Let's try it. If it works, great. We'll keep using it. If not, go away and come back when it's better. And I think we need to consider the investment in this capability much more akin to how we think about investing in our experts and build on that partnership idea. So,
and I think
I don't know whether I did understand you completely, but that's what you meant.
No. I think that was a good. I think you caught the frame there really well. So I think this actually. So there are a couple of takeaways from this conversation. So I underlined a couple of times through partnerships, which was something that you mentioned quite a few times. And then the second one was kind of how this actually is not just about automating single decisions, but this is a next capability, a capability that basically kind of something that can be scaled and should be nurtured within the organization and grown within the organization in order to reap the benefits. So I think this was really, really useful and really good point of view. Thank you, Joe.
My pleasure.
So we have 10 minutes left. Would it be okay if I used 4 or 5 more minutes to end with the framing, and then we have 5 minutes for questions? So building on top of this, so what have we learned? We have a frame of how to think about decisions. We have a couple of examples what those might be and to give you a better understanding of what are the different ways AI can augment very different types of decisions. Still today, what we are seeing is AI pilots, 15% of those ever manage to bring continuous value. That's a really, really low number. This is based on Accenture studies. And something obviously is there can be improved. One way to think about this one is one way to improve it, and what we have seen with our clients that are leaders in the industry is that when they are intentional about the portfolio of the AI projects and in which areas they fall into, they have the highest likelihood of success. So the dimensions we discussed, strategic and creative contexts, tactical and operationals, and we can think about opportunities where we just change tech, we change the tech, process, and people, and where we rethink the business. Something that Joe also mentioned as what was the level of ambition, rethinking how product development is being done when using the AI to the fullest. So thinking about the AI opportunities to these frames, you can start to understand what are the sweet spots that you want to be in. And this is actually averaged over what we have seen with the work of our clients, where they feel they're getting the most benefit for their business and be able to have the targeted velocity that they want to have, is that they are mainly focused on the opportunities where they are changing a lot of things at the same time when working with AI. It's not just a tech exercise, but also looking ahead into the future, rethinking the business. So some of you might be familiar with two engines model, the Future Firm article by Bain, a great one, recommend to read. Engine 1, customers of today and the needs of today. Engine 2, customers and the business models and the competitors and the markets of tomorrow. And how can you already start prepping for that? And if you think about, and these are very two different type of engines and very two type of ways of working that you need to have in place. But if you take this sort of a mindset in place, you think about your AI opportunities and you think about it as an investment portfolio. Where do you want to put your emphasis in order to get the most value out of the opportunities? This might become handy. And when we talked about the next capabilities in the beginning, these are the you can start treating and you can start growing the capabilities in the areas where you really want to see the opportunities, where you want to see the bang for the buck, such as computational creativity or AI-augmented product development, what we just discussed with Joe. So out of those 400 million decisions 400 million-ish decisions that your company is making, I think the question that you should ask yourself is, what is your AI portfolio like? Are you sure that it's taking you the direction that you really should be going and makes the most sense for your business? Where are you currently best positioned in? Or are you currently in the gather data or amp up the data quality business? Or are you actively seeking out also opportunities that you could move forward with even less volume in more high uncertainty areas? AI is not about predicting from the past data alone. AI is about interacting with the world through the decisions that we make and learning from those outcomes. When you change your thinking to this one, you will start seeing AI opportunities, feasible, realistic, value creating AI opportunities in your business, in your work, in your organization. Thank you. If you have any questions, I think we have some minutes left to cover those through. I'm sure maybe Elena, if you can point out some questions that has been coming up.
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is such a great topic. So I've definitely enjoyed personally listening. And I'm amazed how many decisions we honestly have, and people maybe not realizing how much we need to make, right? So we do have a couple questions. One is my question in line, but I'll start from this behavioral aspect, right? In behavioral aspect, maybe I'll just point not just to AI itself, but to decision making, right? Because we do have quite a lot of data happening in companies. We do have insights, right? So people saying like, I have data, I don't have insights. We do have insights, right? But the decision is usually the breaking point, right? And especially it's a breaking point because of the behavioral we have, and people, even without AI participation, to move to decision is hard, right? So how you see this aspect of overcoming the behavioral challenge, especially now if we say AI is making decisions, even sometimes we see people don't believe people making decisions, right? So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, if I understood right, the question is about kind of, it's two-faceted. So first of all, internally, kind of how to kind of manage the change how to justify AI doing the decisions. Let's start with that. So I think the kind of main angle should be, it's not really about replacing any of the experts, or it's not, even if it's replacing some of, or kind of automating partially or augmenting some decisions, it's not about replacing the experts. It's about kind of taking some of the mundane repetitive tasks and kind of shifting the expert role in more of kind of strategic one. How can I leverage this digital capability to do a better job? How can I be more effective with this tool? It should be more of kind of true partnership, as Joe mentioned, instead of trying to automate and replace. And I think that's the kind of the behavioral aspect within a company that needs to kind of be the mentality in order to be successful. Externally, kind of a decision that is, if I understood right, the kind of second aspect was more about the ethics, kind of. Yep. Yeah. So basically, it's about the constraints and preferences, and it's about keeping human in the loop. So whenever we have decisions where we want to have human interpretation in between, we need to keep human in the loop. However, we can still kind of, it doesn't mean that we won't be able to leverage AI in augmenting or doing parts of the decision making. And second aspect is we can codify our code of ethics also in terms of preferences and constraints that we provide for the system. So regardless of whether it's actually AI doing some of those decisions or it's human in the loop, quite often we still act with number of constraints or guidances that we have in our mind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And maybe just a last question about diversity. So today we had a topic, diversity in several panel discussions, but definitely, do you have any examples, maybe how diversity of the team who is developing the models can improve the model or change the model, or if there is any differentiation actually possible? I do have my personal examples from the healthcare, right? When the skin cancer, for example, if you look at different age, the skin type, the gender, the race, right? So, but any examples you have been coming across when the team diversity have been making the difference in a way how the AI have been performing?
So first of all, that's a really broad question, but I'll try to kind of go from top down. So first of all, what are the kind of parts what are the decisions that we want AI to augment? And I think the more diverse the team, the more broader and the more interesting questions that we can come up with. So not only the value of single model, but where do we aim our focus? What are the opportunities we focus on first of all? I think that's the diversity in the team enables that. If we dive deeper into kind of the data space that we are using, then obviously diversity is an aspect there, like you mentioned, the healthcare example.
Yeah.
But kind of we can also go a bit deeper than that. Let's take an example from product development space, recipe generation space. If AI is the one that is basically trying to find out from the broad search space of all recipes, find something interesting. If all we have is kind of small bubbles in the search space of the kind of things that we have already tried out and things that we already kind of have kind of proven to be good, there's a lot of gaps in the search space that we haven't been kind of visiting. And if we have the collective knowledge from diverse, different people from different backgrounds, from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from different cultures, we have much better chance as tackling the search space as a whole, instead of trying to kind of find instead of being kind of stuck in those small areas in the broader search space. So I think 3 levels. So what are first of all, the opportunities, then of the data perspective, and then from the effectiveness perspective, I think all 3 levels, diversity is a key player.
So this is fantastic answer. So thank you so much, Jonne. I think this is really super helpful to see all these different layers, right? Because definitely, the all aspects you can look, right? And the question definitely broad. So we are actually already 3 minutes over, which is great. So super engaging. Fantastic insights that the number of people who have been joining our sessions have been growing. So by the end of the session, we got 30% more than we started. And I always actually see that people come in more and more at the end, which is fantastic. So thank you so much. For people who might have additional questions, please post on the app, or you can, through the app, you can actually directly contact Jonne and ask the question. Thank you.
And if anyone has any further questions or wants to follow up, you can reach me through LinkedIn or firstname.surname@thoughtworks.com. So happy to elaborate, happy to answer any of the questions that you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. So see everybody at the town hall. Bye-bye.